Okay, we're back from the break. Thank you much for tuning in, and they should flip that number up below there, and I encourage all the callers that may still even tune in for the reruns that this is a live show, and no question is too stupid or too silly. Nobody knows who you are, so if you have a medical question that you want answered, and if I can't answer it, I'll tell you, and I'll research it and I'll bring it back next week. But my experience has been there isn't too much that I really haven't seen or been able to explain. But as I alluded to prior to the break, I happened to be flying back from Houston last weekend, and you know, they have DirecTV on the airplane, and it's kind of nice, and usually I'm watching whatever movie is on there. But this caught my eye, which was a CNN thing. Now, I normally don't watch Communist News Network, but on that particular time I did. And they had a pot versus pill show. And in that particular show, I mean, I've been doing some research, and I've been reading a little bit, but this was a very informative segment. And one of the things I found very useful was that in the frontal lobes, which is the front part of our brain, that determines rational thinking, judgment, things of that nature. And they actually, unfortunately, these people had died of heroin overdoses and things of that nature, but they actually did stains on the frontal lobe, and they could see where the heroin and the opioids had caused a very pronounced and very profound change in the neuronal patterns of the brain. They had shown death to certain neurons, certain changes, not Alzheimer's changes, but changes due to the opioids. They actually gave those patients, and then some of those people were using marijuana or cannabinoid processes to help get off of their opioids. Now, the cannabidiol, which is CBDs, and everybody's heard a lot about CBDs, have been, they're number one, they have a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. So they're very useful in things of arthritis and things of that nature, but it is a journal of irreproducible results. It doesn't really work for everybody, but it could work for a lot of people. But the synopsis is that given CBD to these patients caused a correction and a change back towards a more normal nervous pattern in the frontal lobes. So what they were saying made a lot of sense, is that you can't just tell a heroin addict, just say no. They don't have the judgment to do that, and it's because the opioids have changed their frontal lobes. And if you've ever seen somebody who has severe dementia, or somebody who basically has lost their frontal lobes due to automobiles and things of that nature, they lack judgment. They do not know right from wrong. They can't make intelligent decisions, and so that's why you can't just tell these people no. And there was another article I read recently that showed that states where marijuana had become legal and actually was recreational has seen a large decrease in the amount of prescription opioids to Medicaid and Medicare patients, which does fit in line that marijuana, recreational CBDs, have curative and regenerative properties. And when I talked about Suboxone, I talked about an agonist-antagonist, and that's the best situation that you can get. And you find that with THC and CBD. So you find that CBD is the basically antagonist to the cannabinoid receptors that we have in our brain. So this repair, fix thing that we do is very healthy for neurons. And it also is very useful as an anti-inflammatory in Alzheimer's. So there's actually a medical company that's coming out and producing medical-grade CBD, and I think it's in front of the FDA, which is why you're probably seeing people like ex-Speaker of the House, John Boehner, talk about legalizing hemp nationwide, because CBD does actually have a lot of regenerative and curative properties. And it's not that I'm going to suggest that everybody run out and buy CBD, but I think it's something that you should investigate. As an alternative medicine, a lot of doctors won't prescribe it, won't have any knowledge of it. part of the reason I prescribe or I'm able to do medical marijuana cards is because I'm not run by a big health organization that receives the bulk of its money from the federal government. They just don't want that issue being plagued. They don't want their doctors doing medical marijuana cards because they don't want to have the feds come down on them. So independent doctors like myself and a few others who have forward thinking or thinking outside the box a little bit and aren't having people running them and telling them what to do, have the ability to do these things that other doctors may be so-called pigeonholed and they're not able to do it. But very, very, enlightening information on how CBD and medical grade marijuana can be very, very helpful. And I've seen it. I've seen patients reduce their opioids. I've seen them come down and cut them in half. And I've seen it in my own practice. So this is not unusual, and I encourage anybody who's listening who wants to look at that route. If your doctor is not willing to talk to you about it, I certainly am, and develop a plan to help put that in place so that you can reduce your dependency on opioid medications. I only see it getting harder and harder for patients to get their prescriptions, and I see pharmacies continuing to ratchet it down. I see doctors getting more afraid, and it's just a matter of time. If a patient has an overdose, it's now against the law for an ER or for any facility that sees an overdose not to report it. And that's how they're going to come back and pinch doctors. Hey, Louie, you're on the line?
Hey, Doc, how you doing? Yeah, it's me. Listen, I got a question now. My blood pressure fluctuates and stuff. Now, I understand that, everybody says like 120 over 78 or and stuff is fine. Well, mine's never been like that. But it does fluctuate. Where is an actual dangerous blood pressure, for a person like a senior citizen? Where's the numbers that are actually dangerous, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, you brought up a really interesting question. Everybody thinks their blood pressure is like 120 over 80 would probably be the number you'd want to be at, but it's, as we get older, and when I say older, older than the age of maybe 55, you actually are targeting a much higher blood pressure for patients. And what I'm trying to say is the new norm for people, let's say over the age of 55, maybe 55 to 60, might be 135 would be the number. At some point, you stop worrying about the bottom number. And the reason for that is because, and gets kind of complicated, but imagine that you're 18 and your blood vessels can expand and contract depending on whatever your blood volume is. And so they're very pliable, they stretch. And so if we look at this pure physics formula, which says if I decrease the diameter of a pipe by a half, I have to increase the velocity 8 times to get the same volume through that pipe over a period of time. So what we see is that we get older, we start to look at the top number, and the difference between the top number and the bottom number is what we measure in blood pressure, and that's called pulse pressure. So in fact, the owner of the station has had that same issue, and I had to explain to them that blood pressures of 140 over 110 is the same as 130 over 90, because the difference between those two is only 40 millimeters. So it doesn't matter if, so as you get older, you start to see these numbers kind of diverge, and so they get bigger. And that's because your blood vessels become stiffer. So I don't mean to tell you how to build a watch, but I will tell you that I'm tolerant of 145, 150. When you're in your 60s, I'm tolerant of even a little bit higher blood pressures, but I don't like the systolic number to go above 160 no matter what your age is. So that's kind of my upper limit. and I only use the bottom number, the diastolic, in young people. Young people, it tends to be, that's the volume of distribution. In older people, it's not. So did you get an answer to that?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you say, but see, like my blood pressure don't stay at certain numbers. I mean, sometimes it'll hit 180, but then it'll come down. I don't know what makes it come down, but it'll come down to like 140 sometimes.
Well, I think you're looking at when you're taking your blood pressure. So there are certain situations that raise blood pressure, like obviously it's supposed to be raised after you get in a little heated argument, or you're exercising, or you're doing any physical activity. It also elevates after eating. Those things. So if you're going to check your blood pressure, you want to check it at a quiet time, not at a nervous time, because it's supposed to go high during those times. And blood pressure is a dynamic process. It changes all the time. The number will never, ever be the same. I can check it 1 minute, it'll be 128 over, let's say, 88. Take a cuff off, let your arm rest. It just depends where I hit it on that cycle of blood pumping through the artery at that particular time. So we look at trends in blood pressure, not absolute numbers.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Doctor. You answered my question. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. You have a good night.
You're welcome, Louis. Thanks for calling in. And that's a really big topic in blood pressure is, you know, what is it and what should I do for it? Most of the time we don't know the cause why you have high blood pressure, you just have it. Stress is a big inducer of it. Caffeine will raise your blood pressure. Eating will raise your blood pressure. Eating raises your blood pressure through insulin secretion, and insulin is a very potent vasoconstrictor, as well as it is an anabolic hormone. So you don't want to check it after you eat. Alcohol raises your blood pressure. More than 2 ounces of alcohol will raise your blood pressure, and actually if you do that consistently, you may develop cardiomyopathy, or a problem with the heart and a stiffness in the vessels. But a little bit of alcohol is good for HDL, good cholesterol. So a glass of wine a day usually keeps the doctor away. So why shouldn't you do that? But if you're concerned about it, you know, that's when you bring it into your doctor, and they have a discussion. The most commonly prescribed blood pressure pill on a doctor's visit is nothing. Most of the time they don't prescribe blood pressure pills at all. They tell you to check your blood pressure, you know, give me some readings, take it at different times so that I have a better idea under what circumstances cause that blood pressure. All right, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we'll pick up the opioids, or if we have another caller, we'll deal with that. And again, thank you for tuning in.